This video is all about fixing the soft close mechanism on the boot or trunk of your Mercedes. This particular Mercedes we're going to be working on is a Mercedes R230, a 500 SL. The soft close mechanism nearly always fails because of a vacuum leak, and if you find yourself in a bind, it's emergency and you can't get the roof up or down, you can just disconnect the appropriate fuse in the fuse box, and that will reset the PSE pump and should get you out of trouble. Now, resetting the PSE pump will only work a couple of times, and then the problem will arise again, and the fuses live under here. One of these catches is broken, but these should have two catches. You pull the catches towards you and this panel lifts up. There are videos online showing you how to take this out, but you don't need to do that. And the fuse to reset the PSE pump is this yellow fuse here. It's in the black fuse holder. It's a yellow 20 amp fuse. If you take that out when the car's not running, put it back in, that will cure your problem in the short term. But what we're going to do is actually fix the vacuum leak, fix the vacuum leak on this car. On most cars, it's just merely an irritation if your boot soft close or trunk soft close isn't working, but on the R230, if you don't get it fixed, it can lead to some very expensive problems. Once the soft close stops working, people tend to start slamming the boot down, the trunk lid down, and that does two things. Eventually, you will break these flaps here, the little ratchets in the flaps here, and once those flaps start falling forward, your roof will no longer operate correctly. And the other thing you'll do by slamming the boot down is you will potentially crack some of the plastic fittings within the actuator mechanism. And last but not least, if you don't address a small vacuum leak, your PSE pump, which lives down there, will be running much longer than it needs to and will thus wear out much quicker than it normally would, and that will cost you potentially hundreds if not thousands of pounds or dollars to fix. Now, I could just whip out the actuator mechanism here and repair it, but before doing so, I'm actually going to spend a few minutes explaining exactly how these actuators work in here and how these units work, because there is so much misinformation on the internet and also bodge repairs. So if you just want to see this fixed and repaired, then skip ahead in the video. But if you actually want to see how these work and potentially how to repair one of these properly, then watch the next few minutes of the video. This is the soft close actuator from a Mercedes R230, and it's essentially made up of three different parts. You have this tank here, you have this little tank here, the round tank known as the hockey puck, and you also have this piece in here which controls the flow of air from the PSE pump, which comes in via this yellow line here. This little circular tank here controls the opening of the car. When you press the button on your key fob or pull the handle or activate the switch on the drawer, air is sent down here, controlled by this unit, and sent into this tank here, and it pushes a rod out here which unlocks the lock like so. When you gently close the boot or the trunk lid, this will click once like that, and then this tank here is responsible for pulling the trunk or the boot closed completely, and air is fed down here into this tank at about 6 psi and pushes this all the way up like so to close the lid softly. This particular unit here I got from the R230 graveyard, and the guy who sold it to me was not sure whether it's working or not, and I can confirm that it is indeed knackered, and I'll show you why in just a second. What is interesting is you can see that somebody has tried to do a bodge repair on this unit here. You can see the signs of epoxy that they've used, and perhaps the person doing the repair wasn't aware of a couple of things. Firstly, this part here, which is detachable and removable, is still available from Euro in America, and it costs just over £50. And what happens is, if your soft close hasn't been working for a while, and either you or the previous owner has been slamming the boot shut for a period of time, these little catches here can all crack and this tank will start leaking. And one of the things that people suggest doing is epoxying it closed again, which you can do. My preferred solution would be simply to go and buy a new tank and fit that, and that will solve that problem. This is a new tank here. You can see the part numbers here, and when you buy it, it comes not just with the tank, which is here, but also with a handy set of instructions for removing the old tank and fitting the new one. We will be fitting this tank later in the video, but you can see that it just clicks in with these 2 feet here and here. If you're having problems unlocking your car and you think this might be the problem, you could just put this Euro part number here into rockauto.com and buy one of these. You can also go along to the SL shop and various other places and buy them, but you'll probably end up paying a little bit more. Similarly, if you're continually slamming the boot or the trunk shut, you can, over a period of time, start to crack these plastic fittings here. Once again, this tank is common to many soft close mechanisms on the Mercedes and is still available directly from Mercedes. It has a part number on it. I'll leave all these part numbers in the description. This is also about £57 from Mercedes. If your soft close is not working, you've either got a problem with this tank, which is rare but not unheard of, you've got a problem with the lines, or by far the most common problem is with this unit here. Now, that unit there actually slides out in its entirety simply by squeezing together these 2 clips. This will slide out. This little tube here fits into this rubber hose here and controls the opening of the car. And this little tube back here is where the air to this white tank goes and controls the soft close of the car. And this top inlet here is where the air from the PSE pump comes into this unit, and this unit here has a couple of actuators inside it which determine whether the air is actually used to close the car or open the car. In order to remove this from the whole assembly, you need to first pull off these 2 vacuum lines here. They just pull straight off. They're clipped on there, and they're clipped on there quite tight, but you don't need to put a screwdriver or anything between here. You just need to give them a sharp tug. What you don't want to do is damage any of these 2 fittings. Once you've taken those 2 off, this is just held in with 2 clips. You can see one of them here, and if I show you on the one we've removed from another unit, you can see there are 2 clips, and you just squeeze them in and this will slide out very easily. On the R230 and several other Mercedes, this little unit here has 6 ports that are not in use and are sealed with little metal ball bearings, and I'll show you where those 6 ports are. There are 4 on this side here, a large one at the top, this one here, there's 1 here, and then right at the bottom, there's 1 just here where my thumb is. If you spin this around the other way, there are 2 more ports, 1 here and 1 difficult to see that is just under there. Some people, when trying to fix any potential leaks, make the mistake of thinking there's only 4 ports. They seal up 4 ports, put the whole thing back together and wonder why it's still not working. And other people, like the person who repaired this, make the mistake of trying to seal those ports with this in situ, and what you end up doing, it's exactly what they've done here, is getting epoxy on the actual housing itself, which makes it almost impossible to actually take this out and replace it. You see, the thing that many people are not aware of is that these little units here and the pucks and the tanks are actually common to many Mercedes. For example, this is off a W220, and what you'll find is it is much cheaper going onto eBay and buying a second-hand one of these units from a 220 than it is on a 230. So for example, this here cost us about £80 on eBay. It looks practically brand new, and we'll just be using this unit here to fix a car, or the car that we're going to repair. These units are still available from Mercedes. The R230 unit is about £277 plus VAT, but as I say, generally speaking, you're going to need to repair either just this tank, this puck, or most commonly this piece here. Just before we set about actually fixing the car, I'm going to show you what should happen to these units if they are working correctly, and how you can test them to see if they are knackered. In the first instance, I'm just going to demonstrate the opening of the car using this knackered unit from an R230. And what we're going to do, just using some offcuts of our silicone hose, is I'm going to use this DeWalt air compressor here, and I'm going to put 3 psi down the line into here, and what you'll see happening is this actuating a little lever and opening the car. So I'm going to dial this up to just 3 psi, and that's going to put air down this line, fill this tank up here. A little lever is going to push out, and it's going to unlock the car. There you are. You can see that that rod has now pushed out. Now, what people don't realize is that the PSE pump is a very clever pump that can create both negative and positive pressure. So once the car is unlocked, this would then put this back to atmospheric pressure. So to simulate that, I just need to disconnect this hose here, and you can see that goes back in. Now you can also see that this tank is holding pressure. If this tank had a leak, that rod would start contracting automatically. Now I've changed the routing of this here to the yellow line, and what I'm going to do is simulate closing the trunk to the first click like that, and then we're going to dial this up to 6 psi. And what you'll see is, you will see this struggling to close. This rod will come down here, forcing this up, but you'll see that you won't actually fully close this. So let's just try that. Can you see how the rod pushes down and then quickly retracts? Now that is because we have a vacuum leak in this unit here. I've switched this compressor over to a working unit now, and what you'll see is we've simulated the first click here. We've got this set to 6 psi, and what you should see now is as this tank is pressurized, this is pushed down, and you should see that click into the second position. Once again, there were no vacuum leaks on this unit, so that rod stays in that position. If we now disconnect one of these lines here, you'll see that rod retracting, but the car will stay locked. Now you could do this same test just using one of the garden weed sprayers and pumping up the pressure, or a pressure bleed or something like that. But if you haven't got one of these DeWalt air compressors, they're absolutely fantastic, not just for blowing up your tires, but for testing fuel injectors and doing a whole other series of tests. Now, I am a bit of a purist when it comes to fixing Mercedes, and I always believe that you should actually replace the part with a genuine Mercedes part or a good quality replica if available, rather than bodging it. If you do want to actually cure the leaks in your actuator unit here, then the glue to use would be something like JB Weld Quick Weld, sometimes Gorilla Glue Clear Works. People who've used Owlite haven't had much success with that, but what you want is a good 2-part epoxy. You cannot seal these ports here with any kind of silicone gasket sealer. It needs to be a good quality 2-part epoxy. Let it dry overnight before you put the whole thing back together again, and my advice would be to actually test the unit before you put it back together to make sure that you've cured all the leaks. In the case of this second-hand unit, which I bought and is knackered, I'm going to see if I can repair the bodge. And the first thing I need to do is get off this epoxy, which is effectively gluing this unit to the actual case. Just how this epoxy is just flaking off. That is never going to seal anything because it's not adhering to the plastic. And this bit here has to come off as well. That should allow us to squeeze these 2 clips in and push this out. Now we just have to carefully pry that hose there off without damaging it, hopefully. And we should just be able to squeeze these 2 together and pull this out. There we go. Now we can see, you see this here, if you were trying to seal this with glue, you would have to seal that one there and that one there, and unless you take this unit out, you can't necessarily even see those bits. This here, incidentally, is a vent hole, and you shouldn't seal that under any circumstances. Having taken this glued one out here, there is one difference between these 2 units, and that is that this has this lower panel. To remove this, you just need to very gently lever these little catches up and just wedge 2 safety pins under there, and this should just slide off like that now. We'll slide this cover back on to the other unit because we're going to fit this to someone's car. We might as well make it OEM. It transpires that the R230 does actually need that plastic plate on there because otherwise this moves up when you apply pressure and the vacuum is broken. So you need to have that plastic plate on there in order for this to work on the R230, but not on the W220. You can't hope to repair this without taking it off. And just to illustrate the point, up here, this is supposedly repaired, but if we try and zoom in, you can see that there's a crack along there. Can you see that? And that crack is not filled by the epoxy, and that crack is actually where this unit is leaking from. What we are going to be using to fix this is, rather than just slapping some glue on the end of there and hoping for the best, we're just going to use a standard car valve and glue that on, and we're going to be using some 2-part JB Weld. So we will actually fill this up with JB Weld and then wedge it on there, and that'll have that would probably actually cure the leak by itself, but it will push this little crack together, and that, as they say, ain't going nowhere after we put some JB Weld on there. It's also important that you remember to rough up the surfaces of anything you're going to glue. So we're just going to go around the edge of here with a little bit of sandpaper just to get some roughness on that. You don't have to go crazy with this JB Weld, otherwise it'll just squeeze out everywhere. No, it does squeeze out everywhere. What I'd suggest is you actually wipe it off while it's still wet, so you don't make such a huge mess. So this just needs to be rammed onto there. It's a really tight fit anyway. And as I say, that is going to cure any leak. Not only will it cure that leak, but it'll squeeze that crack together and it looks an awful lot neater. Not that you'll ever see this, but having big bits of glue like this everywhere is just not tidy. If you do need to cap off these smaller pipes, rather than just slapping on epoxy and hoping for the best, you can use these end caps from glass fuses. Just fill them with JB Weld and they will fit on there exactly. And once again, rather than just hoping for the best that the epoxy that you're going to use is actually going to seal these things, if you want to seal them, put a cap on the end, ideally a rubber cap, but failing that, a metal cap from the end of a fuse will do the job. It's the next day. We're going to see if our JB Weld has repaired the leak there, and we're going to replace this manky old puck that someone's tried to glue together with the one from Euro Parts. To remove this air tank here, rather than just trying to get a screwdriver under there and wedging that up, you'll probably end up either cracking the housing or this tank. What you ideally need to do is get 2 watchmaker's screwdrivers and pry both of the split pins together. It's easier to show you on here. So you're effectively squeezing these 2 together and then using a 3rd screwdriver to wedge that out. You can use a vise to do that, or your wife or your daughter. But as I say, if you just try and use brute force to get this out, you're liable to damage it. You can also put a drop of washing up liquid or oil, 3-in-1 oil, down those holes to help it come out. Well, that did not want to come out after hours of battling. We actually broke one of the feet there, which doesn't matter because we're going to be replacing it, but that is not as easy as it looks to get out. Getting that back in is a whole lot easier. We just used a dab of 3-in-1 oil on the feet and that just pushes in and clicks into place. So we've set this to 8 psi. In fact, 6 psi is not enough on this tank to get the second click. We've pushed this up 1 click. Let's just see what happens. If we push this now, do we get the second click? There we go, that's the second click, the soft click. The only problem with our repair is you can see that that figure there is counting down. And if I hold the section that we've repaired underwater here, just that section, you can see there are some air bubbles. So whilst we fixed it well enough for the soft close to work, we have not completely eliminated the vacuum. Just using this Mitivac vacuum gun, if there were no leaks, this would hold vacuum, but you can see that it's not holding vacuum. So what you can do is you can put some glue around where you think the leak is, and this vacuum gun will effectively suck that glue into the cracks. So now I've just put super glue around the end there, and the vacuum is pulling that super glue into the cracks. We're just going to hold it a little bit, but you can see that the vacuum is actually holding now. I'm just put rather too much glue on, I don't want to get everywhere. There we go, I think we've fixed the vacuum leak here. We just put a little bit of shrink wrap over the end of it, covering the super glue and also the JB weld. That is now holding steady, and this works perfectly well, this unit now. So let's get on and fix this actuator. To access it, we're going to need to undo these two stops here. There's one here and there's one here. On some cars, these stops, the position of them is crucial and they are marked. So get a felt tip pen or some masking tape and make sure you put it back exactly where it came from. Just note when you take these screws out that they should have a dab of blue thread lock on them when you put them back in. If you look closely, you can see that somebody has been in here before, because the edges of these little Mexican hat fittings are all jagged as if someone has trained their rat to go in there and gnaw them. As I've mentioned before, these are a style of Mexican hat fittings, and you cannot get this fitting here out without pulling out the top bit first. Got all of those 5 little fittings out. This should just drop out. This lining here will now pull down, but it is actually tucked in here, so you need to pull it quite hard to get it down. As you pull this down sharply, you'll hear a snapping sound as this releases and as this releases, and also as this section here pulls out. Now, you don't need to take this down all the way, you just need to get it out far enough so you can access the actuator here. Before taking these screws here out, we're just going to draw around them, because it's important that you line the boot lock up when you put it all back together. Once again, note that these screws here have a little dab of thread look on them, so don't forget to put that back on when you put it back together. Once you've undone those screws, the only thing holding this in is the gold rod, which we're just going to pop off here. It's just a ball joint. You can do that with a screwdriver or a trim tool. That's that popped off there. You might find it's an awful lot easier to pop that off than it is to get it back on again, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Now, to get this out, you're just going to have to push it through there. It will still be attached by some wires, so just do this bit carefully. We're just going to pop these wires out so I can have a look at the unit. They just pull straight out. In fact, as soon as I pull that wire out, you can actually hear the air hissing out of there. These two fittings here just pull straight off. You're going to hold it with one hand and pull with the other hand. Try to avoid getting a screwdriver or anything in there, because you can actually crack and damage these fittings by doing that. Got those two vacuum lines off. The last thing we have to do is just cut 2 zip ties. There's one on this side and there's one on this side, and then that unit will drop straight out. I can see instantly that this unit has multiple issues. First of all, the vacuum leak is no doubt coming from that crack on the top there, if we can zoom in, so we'll be replacing. Secondly, you can see that this housing here has started to crack, and eventually this will start leaking if it's not leaking already, and opening the car will start to become a problem, as well as just the soft close mechanism. Now, as I mentioned, the constant slamming of a boot when your soft close isn't working will lead these brittle plastics to crack eventually or prematurely. Next up, we're going to slide this unit with the crack out. The first thing we need to do is just disconnect that hose. You can just do that carefully with a large flat blade screwdriver. And then you just need to squeeze in this clip here and the one on the other side, and this will just pull out. Got those 2 clips loose, and now we can just replace this cartridge here. We will take this home and repair it. And remember, if you're planning on getting replacement from another car, to take this bottom plastic plate, which you will need. We're going to change this little puck here anyway, but in the interests of science, let's just see if it's actually leaking. We'll dial this up to 3 psi and see if that little rod comes out. You can see that that rod is slowly but surely moving in, which means this tank is no longer holding pressure. We've got that Euro tank in there and everything back together. Just for good measure, I'm putting a car valve over that. It's not leaking or cracked, it's almost brand new, this piece here, but it'll just stop it cracking, or help it stop it cracking in the future. We just have to remember to plug this in here and here, And Mike has just turned up with some cable ties, which is the one thing I forgot. And then we should be job done. When you put this back, that it slots underneath these wires here, and you need to cable tie them to the back there. Just remember to plug this wire in, this wire, and obviously attach the two vacuum lines as well. Now for the tricky bit of getting this ball joint attached. Sometimes it's dead easy and you can just push it on, and sometimes it's a nightmare. We managed to get that ball joint on there without any tools, just using our fingers. Now we just need to put these two screws in here, making sure they exactly line up with the paint. Don't forget to put the thread lock on these bolts when they go back in. You don't have to go crazy. Just cable tying these wires back. Obviously, if you were doing this job, it would be a good idea for you to test that everything's working, but I am confident that everything is going to work first time. Next up, we just need to put this trim back on. It clips on in two places, and you have to tuck this in here to push these in with the little Mexican hat fitting started, and then push the Mexican hat fitting in afterwards. Last but not least, we need to put these boot stops on. Don't forget to put the thread lock on the screws. And now the moment of truth. We've got everything back together. Does this boot close? There you go. There's a second click. Oh no, you will not believe what I've just done. Of course, now that the boot close mechanism is fixed, this car has locked itself, and of course the keys are in the boot, not just for this car, both sets, but also for my red 280 SL disaster.